And good morning. How are you? So here we are back with Coffee with Mr. V. We're here to answer all of your questions, hopefully, with regards to the A-level and the IB economic specification. But in order to participate with Coffee with Mr. V, you need to go and grab yourself coffee or any drink that you fancy. Go and put it in a cup, a glass, a mug. And then with me, we're going to do what we call the synchronized sip. And that's going to be the best part of your day. So here we go. I love coffee. So a lot of you have been emailing in and asking me if I would talk a little bit about quantitative easing, or QE. And that's probably partly to do with the email that I sent, the blog that I wrote about looking at Rishi Sunak's most recent policy pledges of pumping 330 billion into the UK economy, which I think is a great strategy, but I did question where he was getting this money from. And one of the scenarios that I alluded to was this idea that maybe it will come through quantitative easing. But we'll look at that, okay? Because quantitative easing isn't fiscal policy. Quantitative easing is monetary policy. It's a policy at the disposal of the central bank, which in the case of the UK is the Bank of England, which is independent of the government. And actually, Rishi Sunak, our Chancellor of the Exchequer, has absolutely no authority over the Bank of England. Okay? It's an independent body. Where does QE come up? So in the Edexcel course, it very explicitly comes up in 2.6.2b and 2.1.2e, where we should look at the effects on inflation. And in the IB specification, it's kind of tucked away a little bit in 2.5, where it just talks about the money supply. But we can do that in a moment. Okay. Now I've got a little bit of a flow chart, or the starts of a flow chart on the board, and you need to kind of get yourself into a scenario in your head of where the government is running a budget deficit. G is bigger than T. Okay, so we have our budget deficit, and the UK has a kind of persistent budget deficit at the moment, but looking at the proposals that are coming along in the not too distant future, we're going to have an incredibly big budget deficit this year. T is tax revenue. It could also mean revenue from state-owned industries like oil industries if we were talking about Saudi Arabia or Oman. But since we're really talking about the UK here, we don't have any state-owned industries really, which are generating any sort of revenue. So T is tax revenue. G is government expenditure. And in the UK at the moment, the figures are something like 800 and then 760, which means there's a shortfall of 40 billion. As I was discussing in the email, though, Rishi Sunak's come along and said that we need to find 330 billion. So where does that money come from? Well, you need to sell government bonds, all right? A lot of people make the mistake that you can just get it from another country. That sounds like foreign aid. That's not what we're talking about here. And by the way, the UK doesn't get a lot of foreign aid from other countries. So the way this works is the government sells bonds to anybody that wants to buy them. So they could sell a bond to me. I might decide to buy a bond. Or really, they're looking for banks. They're looking for financial institutions, commercial banks like HSBC to buy these bonds. Now, just remind yourself, what are these bonds? These bonds are a promise by the government to repay the money over the course of a period of time, say 10 years, with a small interest rate, but we call that the bond yield. That has nothing to do with the base rate or bank rate that's set with the Bank of England. So bond yield does not mean bank rate. We might look at later that there is a relationship between the two, but they are not the same thing. So over time then, me and other people, we have government bonds, and the banks have got their government bonds. We bought them because they were offering a relatively decent interest rate compared to the banks. And the government, I don't think, is going to go bankrupt anytime soon. So it's a relatively good investment. Okay, so you need to get you need to get into the situation of bondholders over here, Bank of England over here. No relationship at the moment. The whole idea of quantitative easing is to increase the liquidity in the economy. Bonds are an asset. They're a store of value. But if you go into Starbucks and try and buy a coffee with them, Starbucks won't take that as payment. You need to have cash. You need to have liquid cash. The difference between something that is liquid or illiquid is whether or not you can buy something in Starbucks with it. Okay, that's a very good test, a good litmus test of whether something is considered liquid or illiquid, money or an asset. Okay, you can't go into Starbucks and buy a Starbucks coffee with your house. Okay, neither can you do it with, I don't know, a form of gold or jewelry or a government bond. They're what we call illiquid assets. However, you can pay in cash, you can pay with a debit card, a credit card, you can probably pay with a check. That's what we would call a liquid asset. So the difference between illiquidity and liquid assets is the idea of, can you spend it? Currently, we have government bonds that are illiquid. We can't spend them, but we're sitting on a lot of money. Those assets have value. The idea behind quantitative easing then. A lot of people get it confused with just printing money. Well, there is an element of printing money. It probably doesn't happen physically printing money anymore, all right? But we could visualize it that way. That's meant to be a stack of, £50 notes in cash. Okay? But let's be honest, in 2020, it's probably all done electronically. Then what happens is the Bank of England will buy government bonds off bondholders, such as normal everyday people like me, commercial banks. And this is the very simple process of quantitative easing. The bonds come this way to the Bank of England. The cash is going that way. Now, I am sitting on a load of cash, very liquid cash. The Bank of England has all the bonds. We haven't made anybody richer. I simply have the same value that I did before, wrapped up in an asset. It just happens to be that this is now a liquid asset. It's cash. The Bank of England has bonds that are worth the financial value that they pay for the cash in cash. All right. All we've done is we've increased liquidity. I now have cash. And as a bit of a thought experiment, just what happens to you when you have £10 in your pocket? It's not there by the end of the day, is it? If you're anything like me, if you've got £10 in your pocket, you end up spending it on something totally trivial, something you probably didn't need at the start of the day. And another way of thinking about it is how annoying for you has kind of Apple Pay become. Now it's too easy. It's too easy to spend cash. You just go and you've spent it. Yeah, cash gets spent, and that's the entire purpose of doing quantitative easing. We're hoping that people will spend their cash. What do banks do with cash? Well, for a bank, cash is an anathema to their business model. Banks don't want to sit on cash. Banks want to lend cash out. They want to get rid of it. Like, cash in a bank is doing nothing, but once it's lent to somebody for their mortgage, suddenly it's earning interest repayments. If you lend it to a business and they invest it, again, suddenly it's earning interest for the bank. So banks want to lend it out as quickly as possible so that we get investment going up. Those two things added together gets AD going up. And that is the whole purpose of quantitative easing. It's another way of stimulating the economy to get out of some sort of slowdown, economic slowdown, sort of like we're experiencing at the moment. So, to be clear, the UK and the Bank of England at the moment has not said that it's going to do any quantitative easing yet. It did an enormous amount of quantitative easing at the end of the last financial crisis in 2008, 2009. If you go to the Bank of England, I think the figure is something like £450 billion worth of quantitative easing. Okay? Nobody said that they're going to do anything like that yet, but I might expect them to later on. Problems that are common mistakes that people make. People think that this has got something to do with the government. The government is largely redundant in all of this. Okay, the government sold the bonds a long time ago, 2 or 3 years. What the Bank of England is doing is just simply buying up second-hand bonds that people have already bought from the government. So the government is largely out of the picture entirely, apart from the fact that any repayments that they're making onto the bonds will now be paid straight to the Bank of England. But all we've done is we've increased liquidity, and we should increase AD. Going back to this point, 2.1.2e, this may be inflationary because if you increase AD too much, you create a positive output gap, you hit full capacity, and that creates upwards pressure on prices, and that may cause inflation. So it's essentially, it's a cause of demand pull inflation, possibly. There are too many evaluative points here. And I would suggest to you that in 2008, 2009, actually it was a largely unsuccessful policy. Why? Because you're assuming that when you give people liquid cash, that they will spend it and that they will invest it. But in 2008, 2009, we're coming off the largest recession that most people have lived through. There wasn't a hell of a lot of consumer confidence going around, lots of job insecurity. People didn't really want to spend their money, they'd rather just save it. So we didn't get a whole load of consumer stimulus, consumption stimulus. Similar to investments, the banks themselves didn't necessarily want to lend it. A lot of them had their own debts that they were trying to pay off. And were they really going to start lending it to mortgage, in the form of more mortgages, when the whole cause of the financial crisis was the mortgage problem, that people were defaulting on mortgages? So actually, for all of the money that we spent doing it, AD really only saw a very small shift. And it certainly wasn't inflationary. But we certainly didn't get, in my money, we certainly didn't get $450 billion worth or pounds worth of stimulus going on. So it hasn't been hugely effective. Going to the IB, but also some of the questions that some of the A-level students have had, is how does this affect interest rates? Because there is a lot of literature, both online and in the textbooks, that relate QE to interest rates. What we've done here is we've increased demand for bonds, okay? That means that the price of the bond has gone up, okay? Any demand for anything goes up, the price goes up. However, the repayments on the bond stay the same. It's a bit like a mortgage. You take a mortgage out from the bank for £100,000 and you have to pay £400 a month back to the bank. That is fixed for the term of the mortgage, which may be 20, 25 years. If the house price goes up in that time, you don't have a higher mortgage. Your mortgage is still only for £100,000 and your repayment stays the same. And that's what's going on here. Even though the price of the bond, or the price of the house, or in this case the bond, even though the price of the bond is going up, the repayments are still the same. So the repayments as a percentage of the price of the bond are coming down. Bond yields are coming down because the price is going up. It's actually that the repayments are flat. The repayments are staying the same. The government is still committed to the same repayments every month on that bond. But if the bond is more expensive to buy, then that flat repayment as a percentage of the price is coming down. That's why we say bond yields are coming down. If the yield on one asset is coming down, then demand will start to decrease away from other forms of investment. And therefore, interest rates overall will start to decrease. Again, think about the bank. The bank is stuffed full of cash. At any given time, a bank has a limited amount of money to give out. It's constrained by the amount of deposits that there are in the bank. The interest rate is essentially set by the intersection between demand and supply. If you suddenly give the banks a lot more money, you stuff them full of cash through QE, the supply of money increases and interest rates come down. So there is a link between this process of QE and interest rates. But the mistake people make is that they think bond yields and bank rate are the same thing. They really are. They couldn't be more different. Okay, so hopefully I've explained what QE is. And if you have any questions on that, put them in the comments below and I will try and answer as many questions as I can in the next video. For now, I will try to answer your questions about classical economics that we did in episode 3. Lexi was asking me today to just expand on the way in which I said classical economics could be used as an evaluation to Keynesian economics. Because for my money, 9 times out of 10, or maybe more, maybe 99 times out of 100, you should always be using the Keynesian ADAS diagram. It's far more intuitive. There's only 2 reasons why I think you should use the classical diagram. One, you're told to, so maybe you're asked to compare, or maybe you're asked to do the analysis using classical only models. Fine, if that's the case, then fine. The other one is that you might choose to use the classical model as an evaluation to the Keynesian model. So, for example, for something like expansionary fiscal policy that we were talking about earlier, on the Keynesian diagram, we would be saying, look, G increases, AD increases, and therefore, we're narrowing the output gap and we get economic growth. A classical economist looks at it in this way. Here's AD, here's short run AS, and I'm at Y1, I'm at YFE, I'm on the PPF. If I increase AD to the right, then I've created a positive output gap. I'm actually outside of the PPF for a short period of time. Workers are working overtime. Machines are working beyond capacity. They're working at 110% for a short period of time. But this can't go on forever. What the classical economist argues is that demand for goods and services goes up, therefore demand for labour goes up, therefore wages go up, and therefore costs of production go up, so that short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left, and the economy self-stabilizes. Look, we haven't had any growth. The economy stayed exactly where it was, but the price level has increased. And although I am totally on board with what Rishi Sunak was talking about yesterday in terms of stimulating the economy, this has got to be a little bit of a worry, okay? Because all of this money that he's talking about pumping into the economy is simply being used for consumption. It's not being used for investment. It's not being used to shift the AS curve out that way. He's not talking Keynesian economics in the form of digging ditches, building roads, and increasing potential output at the same time as increasing real output. He's just talking about stimulating AD. He's doing nothing about AS. If I'm a classical economist, I'm worried about inflation. I'm worried about, why isn't it that we're just going to get what's called a wage price spiral? Wages go up, prices go up, wages go up, prices go up, wages go up, prices go up. Is this just going to be inflationary? We'll see. The second question that somebody wanted me to explain to was just to, again, go through the criticisms or the conflict between Keynesian and classical economics. I think the main difference between the two really is the understanding of unemployment. For a For a Keynesian economist, the main form of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. When aggregate demand shifts to the left, we create a negative output gap. We fall inside the PPF. We don't have full employment of resources. There are people who are willing and able to work, but simply cannot find a job because there is not enough demand. Okay? And again, bringing it to where we are, where at the moment in the real world, you can see this. Nobody going to restaurants, no demand for catering services. Nobody flying, no demand for airline services. Demand is shifting to the left, okay? And we're going within our PPF, okay? Very sadly, this is going to lead to some sort of cyclical unemployment in the economy. A classical economist, again, this is my view, has a very different understanding of the form of unemployment. Because in a classical economist's world, we're always going to self-stabilize at full employment. There is always enough demand for the labor, okay? The reason a classical economist says that unemployment exists is because people are simply unwilling to work for the market wage. They would say there is always demand for labor, it's just that people are holding out for too high a wage. So therefore, a classical economist's response to unemployment is always, well, you need to get over yourself and work for less money, okay? And a classical economist looks at the problem here of our recession. not as somebody who thinks we need to shift AD back to the right. Instead, they do understand that we have got a negative output gap. But for a classical economist, the way to fix that negative output gap is to clear all the dirt and grime around the plug hole in the sink. Okay, things like minimum wages, things like trade unions, things like long-term contracts and unemployment benefits, generous unemployment benefits. These are the reasons why people are holding out for too high wages. Some have some legislation, or with the unemployment benefits being too high, it's a disincentive to work. People simply don't want to work for low wages. But if we clear that crap away, okay, and we decrease minimum wages, and we decrease trade union power, and we get rid of unemployment benefits so that if people don't work, they starve, if we get rid of all of that, people will renegotiate their wages lower. That will cause cost of production to fall, and the economy will recover at full employment. Okay, now, I'm not going to tell you which is the way in which you should view the world. What I did say in my email is at the moment, everybody seems to be talking about this in a very Keynesian way. We need to stimulate our way out of the recession by using government spending. However, you will start to see, I am sure, you will start to see critics of this talking about actually how the best way might be to, as I say, decrease minimum wages in the UK, all right? I mean, this may well be a political strategy going forward. Decrease minimum wages. It may be a tool that we can use to decrease trade union powers and decrease unemployment benefits, with the simple idea that it's getting in the way of the market clearing by itself. Remember, as a classical economist, I'm very much of the opinion that the less government intervention in the market, the better. Right, hopefully that has cleared it up for you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. That was Coffee with Mr. V, and as ever, stay safe and take care of yourselves. Okay, bye.